አድማጮቻችን መልካም ቆይታ again ይህ ደግሞ ፓርት 3 የሆነው ዲቨሎፕመንት ዊዛውት ፍሪደም በሚል ተዘጋጀ ዝግጅታችን ነው። እናም ያው ይህ የሰርድ ፓርቲ Human Rights Watch ያቀረበው ዶክመንት ነው። መጀመሪያ ላሳስበን ፈልገው views expressed on this radio necessarily radio አብራራ አቋም ነው ማለት አይደለም። ያው ሚዲያ ነገር ግን በዚህ ዶክመንት ላይ በተለይ የሚመለከታቸው ክፍሎች ለእያንዳንዱ ዲቴል ለሆኑ Human Rights Watch በጊዜው ላቀረባቸው ዶክመንቶች ምላሽ የመስጠትና ለመነጋገር እንጋብዛቸዋለን ማለት ነው። it's a serious የሆነ ዶክመንት ነው። serious attention ከተሰጠው it's win-win situation ለሁሉም ማለት ነው። እነኚህ በሂውማን ራይትስ ዋች ክሌም የተደረጉትን seriously አይተን መፍትሄ ወደሚያቀርብ ሁኔታ ከተካሄደ ለሁሉም ዊን-ዊን የሆነ ሲቹዌሽን ነው ማለት ነው። እና ሶርሱን ለማግኘት ከተፈለገ ዲቨሎፕመንት ዊዛውት ፍሪደም ጉግል ላይ ማግኘት ትችላላችሁ። ማንኛውም ያው እንትናችንን እንቀጥላለን። ኦኬ PBS and social accountability. Quote, social accountability, unquote, is a model of monitoring that promotes accountability through public or community participation. In Ethiopia, the project envisioned NGOs tasked with monitoring basic service delivery and helping hold officials to account. The 2008-2011 country assistance strategy says that this component of the PBS program will, quote, focus on establishing civil society's role in social accountability, improving the interface with the government at national and woreda levels, and giving greater latitude for communities to determine development priorities. The idea of subcontracting NGOs to monitor local government was driven by donors' awareness of the risks involved in providing large sums to local governments without independent checks as to how the money was being used, as well as a desire to see more accountability at the local level while acknowledging that they could not play that role themselves. Component 4, as this NGO's monitoring scheme is known in the World Bank document, is currently still in its pilot stage. It involves 12 organizations that, between them, have 41 other partner organizations working in around 100 woredas. Two donor officials told Human Rights Watch that it is not yet a viable monitoring mechanism on a broad scale and is achieving less than they had hoped. A significant reason for this is the government's passage of the repressive CSO law, which was adopted in January 2009. First proposed several years ago, the CSO law imposes draconian restrictions on NGOs' activity, including requiring them to register and forbidding them from receiving more than 10% of their funds from foreign donors if they engage in broadly defined human rights, advocacy, conflict resolution, or governance activities. In other words, the law permits NGOs to carry out technical service delivery activities in the development sector, but bars them from activities that pertain to state policy, functioning, and accountability. The CSO law was partly conceived to address gaps in the regulatory framework for associations. However, the legislation went far beyond Ethiopia's technical regulatory needs. Initial drafts of the law prompted considerable concern from donors, especially when the text also barred, quote, foreign, unquote, NGOs defined to include domestic NGOs receiving foreign funding from participating in economic development and poverty alleviation activities. The language, which would have meant all donor development aid passed through the state, was removed after strong donor advocacy. Still, the final text that Ethiopia's parliament adopted in January 2009 maintained restrictions on human rights and advocacy activity. Some observers saw the CSO law's restrictions on NGOs monitoring and advocacy as a response to donors' attempts to minimize their own evaluative role and empower civil society groups as agents of social accountability. An academic noted, Component 4 has been complete failure. Publishing budgets at grassroots is nonsense. Component 4 actually made Ethiopia NGOs a target. Donors wanted them to do the dirty work for them, quote unquote. When Ethiopia promulgated the restrictive CSO law, the Netherlands and some other donors threatened to withdraw support for Phase 2 of PBS. Sweden followed through. The Ethiopian government assured the World Bank that the draft law would not affect social accountability activities. However, since the law's adoption, several of the country's most prominent human rights activists have fled the country. Its most prominent human rights groups have dramatically reduced operations and removed human rights activities from their mandates, and an unknown number of organizations have closed entirely. While donors initially lobbied hard in private against the draft CSO law, they have since become complacent about its devastating effect on civil society in Ethiopia and issued only mild public criticism. Several European ambassadors even sought to defend the law in meeting with Human Rights Watch. Currently, the 12 organizations selected by the Ethiopian government to carry out the program evaluations called for under component 4 are, for the most part, NGOs and called mass-based, unquote, civil society organizations, which in Ethiopia are perceived as party-affiliated and controlled. In 2009, they monitored only service delivery, not the politicization of aid distribution. The social accountability model of project evaluation might have been well-intended, but has become almost meaningless since the passage of the CSO law, Productive Safety Net Program. A donor official response for the PCNP in Addis Ababa told Human Rights Watch that there were, quote, many rumors, unquote, about the manipulation of aid circulating among development partners that monitored the safety net program. Despite this, politicization was, quote, not criterion for monitoring, unquote. He said. Another donor official said, quote, if people were excluded for political reasons, I don't think the rapid response teams would pick it up, unquote. The official donor response from the DAG to concerns expressed by Human Rights Watch said that the latest independent impact assessment of PCNP had compared households receiving public workers transfers with those that did not. It showed that, quote, those in the former category were poorer on a number of levels. If there was a widespread patronage or discrimination, one would expect a deviation in these figures, but this survey findings show that on the whole, the program is reaching the intended target group in terms of poverty levels. However, this impact assessment did not examine the alleged politicization of aid delivery. It is a difficult challenge for donors since only a small number would need to be excluded for political reasons in order to send a repressive message. There is a program mechanism, the Kabale Appeals Committee, which reports to be Woreda and comprises people from the Kabale cabinet. A person who is dissatisfied after making a complaint can take the matter further to the Woreda Council, which is supposedly separate from the Food Security Task Forces, which decide which household participate in PCNP. However, this mechanism is comprised because the party controls the Kabali and Warada structure at the local level. Interviews told Human Rights Watch that they either did not bother to appeal to the authorities or were turned away when they did. Respondents frequently said Warada officials referred them back to the Kabali. The Overseas Development Institute study examining the safety net program also described this quote, circular pattern, unquote, of referring appeals back to the Kabali. The Ethiopian government 2009 Financial Accountability and Transparency Survey, 88% of respondents said that the safety net selection process was fair. However, the ODI study looked at the appeals mechanisms and found that, quote, overall they are failing to provide an efficient or effective appeal structure, unquote. In a revealing statistics, it also said that of those households that did not lodge an appeal about targeting, 79% said that they did not do so because there was either no one they could complain to or they did not know what that person was. The study also documented social pressure on people not to appeal over stress to those who did and cases of people forced to rescind appeals. Even if the Ethiopian government opinion surveys are accurate and objective, donors concede that, quote, they don't disprove outright that Kabali officials could control beneficiary lists, unquote. For PCNP and for relief feeding programs, apart from the Ethiopian government's own opinion surveys, there remains no way of knowing whether or not there is a widespread politicization. At a minimum, what is needed is independent monitoring without the participation of the Ethiopian government, that means, of the politicization risk, with spot checks and wide monitoring of those excluded to find out why. Public sector capacity building program. Monitoring of the public sector capacity building program, PCCAP, does not address politicization at all. When asked how donors controlled for politicization in PCCAP, the DAG provided no responses. The manipulation of PCSAP finding would be hard to catch in simple fiscal monitoring of the program. It is the content of activities that is at issue. Partisan political propaganda in schools and in civil service trainings called professionalization, unquote, programs that are actually ruling party indoctrination. As the consultant for a major donor examining PCSAP said, quote, the accounting may say fuel, quote unquote, but fuel for what? Much of the money is on per diems or travel expenses, but you don't know training in what? In what? The content. The meticulous auditing of the projects won't catch that. They should look at the content of the program. I don't think this is a secret. People know this is happening, but they just can't stop it. I have been stonewalled. No one wants to give me budget. We don't look at the content of the training anymore than we look at textbooks, unquote. To ensure that they are not funding partisan political indoctrination, donors should more carefully investigate politicization of PCCAP by conducting an independent study that looks specifically at the content of the quote bulk training, unquote, done under the program and systematically interview civil servants and teachers who took part in the program. A qualitative assessment of the business process re-engineering (BPR) staff evaluation program is also needed. Given all the allegations about BPR used as a political tool, donors should seek to interview a wide cross-section of those dismissed through BPR procedures to find out why they have been fired. Donors should also push the government to rescind clauses in existing BPR proclamations that prohibit appeal upon dismissal, and praise for those dismissed under BPR to be allowed to appeal the decision and have a fair hearing before an appropriate employment tribunal. General education quality improvement projects. In the General Education Quality Improvement Project, GEQIP, donors allocate funds on the basis of an agreed formula to make sure that Ethiopia's regions and institutions are not treated unfairly. While this control for one kind of political bias, regional or institutional, it doesn't monitor, let alone prevent, the way in which individual teachers may be denied training opportunities financed by GEQIP based on their political beliefs or union membership. Were this happening on a large scale, donors would have no way of knowing. What is needed is monitoring that involves interviews with teachers eligible to participate in the teacher development program funded by GEQIP and possibly teachers moving through the teacher training college in the country to assess their perceptions of the political interference in their profession and any discrimination they may have encountered. In addition, donors should assert a precondition for further donor funding for the program. The Ethiopian government's implementation of long-standing decisions from the International Labour Organization and immediate registration of independent teachers' unions such as the National Teachers Association. Not just monitoring. While improved monitoring is important, it would produce better information about realities on the ground for donors, focusing only on monitoring the delivery of individual projects and programs obscures the wider picture of development and political oppression in Ethiopia. The Development Assistance Group study on aid management concludes with a discussion, quote, how much to invest in accountability, unquote. It says development partners should make decisions about the proportion of funds to invest in accountability to prevent distortion on the basis of, quote, systematic and context-specific assessment about the prevalence and cost of distortion in the short-hand, long-term, and the cost of reducing distortion, unquote. It adds, decisions should take account of the relative costs and benefits of investigating in program-specific accountability systems or investing in a country-owned accountability systems, unquote. Donors should recognize that Ethiopia's own accountability systems are moribund, and that the principal barrier to detecting distortion is not donor funds or lack of them, but the Ethiopian government, the fear it instills, and the restrictions it places on donors, opposition parties, and on domestic NGOs. The true domestic accountability system, now defunct, that would independently evaluate government activities. The challenge of monitoring is a symptom of the larger challenge that faces donors operating in a highly restricted and state-controlled environment. Better monitoring would improve donors' understanding of the situation in areas that they are rarely allowed to visit, except when accompanied by government officials. As a World Bank official told Human Rights Watch, quote, what happens on the ground is rarely captured on paper, unquote. He criticized donors' lack of understanding of the Ethiopian political context and said, quote, we need to do much more monitoring, not this weekend, monitoring and evaluation. Donors complain and find fault and then start new projects, unquote. The need for better information is even more important given the restriction on independent media, the government's obstruction of independent investigators, including international journalists, and the impact of the CSO law on the few Ethiopian human rights organizations that were monitoring and investigating human rights violations in the country. In 2005, donors suspended all budget support to the government due to concern their programs would be politicized. In the 2010 DAG study, donors asked whether or not their systems would detect politicization if it were occurring in all key areas. The answer was, despite positive sounding conclusions, quote, no, unquote, yet the programs continue. The next section considers an alternative strategy for policymakers toward Ethiopia. Alternative strategies for policymakers. Donor governments remain unwilling to address the negative consequences of their role in Ethiopia. First, donors themselves claim their relationship with Ethiopia a sign of shared values, in that the Ethiopian government is committed to their idea of development. Second, donor agencies appear firmly committed to funding programs regardless of whether they may be underwriting repression counter to their own agencies' policies. Western governments seeking to assist the Ethiopian population are admittedly in a difficult position. Without international efforts to provide food assistance to between 10 and 20% of the Ethiopian population through emergency feeding programs and the PCNP safety net program, there is a little doubt that millions of Ethiopians would face even more severe food shortages. Donors need to be able to help this at risk without contributing to the government's oppression of the population. It is time that donors begin to confront this crucial issue and devise solutions. Faced with this difficult challenge, donors have been all too ready to ignore the human rights context, increased said, and hope for a change of direction by the EPRDF. The current 2008-2011 country assistance strategy for the World Bank, which sets the framework for donor engagement, envisages a return to even less conditionality through direct budget support. This donor policy is based on view of Ethiopia as a democratizing nation, quote unquote. This sentiment, reflective of general donor strategy, suggests wishful thinking, not facts. Existing donor strategy toward Ethiopia is based on flawed assumptions and ignorance of donors' own assessments. For example, the 2008-2011 country assistance strategy clearly states that the trajectory of Ethiopia's democratic transition would be shaped by local elections in April 2008 and parliamentary elections in May 2010. But the conduct of both elections sharply undermined any suggestion that Ethiopia is, quote, democratizing, unquote. Both polls saw fundamental flaws and serious and widespread violations of human rights. Even for the elections, an official from a leading donor government admitted that there had been, quote, no improvement in political governance, unquote, since 2005. The elections have indeed been crucial in shaping the environment in Ethiopia by cementing the PRDF's complete control of every village in the country. The donor policy of direct budget support that is based on perceived, quote, shared values, unquote, has had many critics over the years. In Ethiopia, the debate is not simply about whether budget support is an effective way to deliver assistance, but whether the method of delivery contributes to government repression. The PRDF maintains its authoritarian grip with donor money support, and yet Prime Minister Meles Zenawi is seeking a lifting of the 2005 restriction on budget support as well as increased funding from donors. A return to direct budget support in the current circumstance should not even be on the donors' agenda. Some World Bank board members and donor nations have attempted to fill the human rights blind spot in the bank's global operation by starting the Nordic Trust Fund to examine how human rights relate to the bank's core work and mission. According to an exploratory study, quote, a baseline survey of bank staff confirmed that staff are interested in human rights, that they view much of their work as having a human rights angle, but have a little or no knowledge of the formal, legal, and institutional human rights foundations and are interested in learning more, especially as it relates to their ongoing work, unquote. The Trust Fund suggested selecting some existing World Bank programs for a pilot scheme to mainstream human rights into bank operations. The bank's Ethiopia's program, in particular, the Protection of Basic Services and Productive Safety Net program, would be a good place to start. A new donor strategy should begin with acknowledging at the policy level that the EPRDF government is an agent of both development and political repression, and that both elements needed to be considered. First, donors need to take into account that ruling party politicization does not merely occur in specific programs, but applies across the board. Reforms such as creating a new appeals mechanisms and citizens' rights cards or training parliamentaries will mean little unless broader human rights are addressed. Second, revising state laws and policies that unnecessarily restrict independent civil society and the media take on urgent importance. And finally, donors need to work together to press for deeply rooted reforms. Donors should address the politicization problem at a macro level. According to a former World Bank official, there needs to be a donor-wide response. How is access to service being filtered across the country? You should not projectize, quote unquote, it. How do you respond more strategically to the choices the government makes restricting freedoms of association and expression? Unquote. When the country assistance strategy is renewed, the current one expires 2011, donors should first tackle the Ethiopian government strategy of economic development without human rights. In most countries, civil society provides an alternative channel to state programs for delivering development assistance, but the government has neutralized NGOs through the CSO law and other means. An official working on PCNP said, quote, "The only solution is third-party involvement," unquote, but that opinion has been cut off. Another said, quote, "Donors need CSOs. They need to diversify their support, but all of them want to survive. Donors and CSOs, they are all worried about the short term. They are very docile and very divided," unquote. The U.S. State Department Inspector General put it best when he noted, "The lack of political freedom," quote, "the lack of political freedom in the country makes it difficult for the embassy's political section to find local partners it can work with on democracy and human rights issues. This is demonstrated most strikingly by the law limiting foreign work with non-governmental organizations, forcing the embassy to focus more on the programs that it can implement rather than those that are most important," unquote. Still have a source for everything when you go through the document. Getting the CSO law rescinded or drastically amended should be a central part of donors' approach to Ethiopia in the future. This would not only permit an alternative channel for aid distribution, but would help ensure that Ethiopians can freely associate, express themselves, and gain work on critical human rights and government issues, as is their right. Lastly, donor countries will exert far more influence on the government if they act together rather than separately. Norwegian diplomats were ejected from Ethiopia in 2007, and donor officials regularly expressed anxiety about the consequence of speaking frankly to the Ethiopian government. Even though there is a formal grouping of donors, the DAG, there has been considerable division among donor governments regarding recent decisions, with many partners feeling that a few donor nations have undermined donor unity with their open support for the EPRDF. UK leader or cheerleader. Prime Minister Meles Zenawi's place on the African Commission of Tony Blair's confirmed Ethiopia's position as a donor darling of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom Department for International Development, DFID, has been a leading funder to the Ethiopian government. The UK is the largest bilateral donor after the United States, committing in 2008 nearly 250 million, approximately 450 million in 2008 prices. Ethiopia is the UK's second largest development program in Africa, with over 250 staffs in Addis Ababa. According to According to donor officials in Addis Ababa, DFID has been the unofficial leader of the donor development assistance group by virtue of size of its contribution and its special relationship with EPRDF leaders. Quote, "They can say things the others can't," unquote, said one official from another country. However, in meeting with officials from nearly every other donor country, including some ambassadors, Human Rights Watch shared frustration with how DFID was using its influence. Many said that it has not concerned only with lobbying the Ethiopian government, but also with persuading other development partners to their favorable view of the EPRDF, sometimes undermining collective positions on human rights. Quote, "We all have a problem with DFID," unquote. An aid official from European government told Human Rights Watch. An official from another European development partner country said, "We are extremely concerned about," quote, "we are extremely concerned about where the UK is going in general. We are at opposite ends of the scale on many issues. People are ignoring the fact that in practice and in theory, this government is sort of communist regime that does not believe in individual rights. They believe in Ethiopia's right to develop. They have a long-term plan for this country and they think they are the only ones who can implement it. And if some people die in the pursuit of Ethiopia's right to develop, then so be it. It is revolutionary. I can see the motives behind what the UK is doing. The UK keeps seeing these positive signs and signals that no one else can see." Still have the site for this, unquote. One aid official from a European Union member state referred to DFID officials as believers, quote unquote, in the EPRDF project, while yet another said, quote, "I am glad I'm not working for DFID. Here you have space to raise things. Talk, you can agree to disagree," unquote. DFID endorsement of EPRDF policies is significant because the ability of donors to act together to pressurize the government on important human rights issues such as elections or monitoring of politicization in development programs rests on them acting together and sharing an analysis of the problem. Even UK Foreign Office officials told researchers that they, quote, "share Human Rights Watch analysis," unquote, of the repressive character of the EPRDF regime. Meanwhile, it was abundantly clear that officials in the DFID office across the road in Addis Ababa did not. Some officials ascribed DFID enthusiasm to the practical need to disperse their funds. As one official from another Western government said, quote, "I used to think these PBS zealots were just naive, but then I began to realize that no, they were actually interested in preserving their programs. Preserving its programs and resisting political judgments of ministers about the country's overall political situation appears to be amongst DFID explicit goals. DFID, this April 2009 internal evaluation of its Ethiopia country program determined the reputational risk of DFID in Ethiopia remains vulnerable to another 2005 type crisis. Alongside approaches to safeguarding the program with appropriate responses, communications need to be stepped up. If such circumstances transpire, then the articulation of key messages to ministers and their constituents may become an important factor in avoiding reactive measures that unduly affect the poor. DFID seems to suggest that protecting its programs and protecting the interests of the poor are one and the same. It is obviously unacceptable that under Ethiopia's donor-supported development program, people may literally starve because of their political beliefs. Yet, despite saying that their aid must not be subject to political distortion, unquote, donors to date appear to be willing to pay that price. Ultimately, if donors care about Ethiopia's long-term development so that all its citizens can benefit, it is essential that there is a democratic space in which Ethiopians can participate and decide their own future, as well as economic and social rights that exist alongside civil and political rights. As declarations at the international level point out, and as donor policies themselves make clear, development without freedom is not true progress. Acknowledgements. This report was written by Ben Rowlands, a researcher in the African division at Human Rights Watch, based on research carried out by Ben Rowlands, Leslie Lefkow, senior researcher and Horn Africa team leader, and Gorget Gagnon, former African director. The report was edited by Leslie Lefkow and Ron Peligal, acting director of the African division. It was reviewed by Jim Ross, legal and policy director, Lane Levin, program director, and Daniel Haas, program editor. Additional editorial assistance was provided by Thomas Gilchrist and Army Ogston, associate in the African division. Grace Choi, Anna Laproy, and Fitzroy Hopkins provided production and photo assistance. John Emerson designed the map. 4 anonymous external reviewers provided comments on a draft. We would like to thank all the Ethiopians and donor officials who agreed to be interviewed for this report, in some cases at greatest risk to their freedom, their livelihood, or their career. We would like to salute in particular the brave Ethiopians who made this report possible. Annex 1, Human Rights Watch to Development Assistance Group, March 19, 2009. Kenchi Ohashi, Country Director, World Bank, P.O. Box 5515, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Politicization of donor-supported government service in Ethiopia. Dear Mr. Ohashi, Human Rights Watch would like to share with you the main finding of our recent research in Ethiopia. You are an international donor that provides financial and technical support to Ethiopian government services, and as such, we would be interested in receiving your feedback on points detailed at the end of this letter for possible incorporation in Human Rights Watch report for publication in mid-2010. Please also find enclosed our forthcoming report on political repression in Ethiopia and its impact on the May 2010 elections, entitled called 100 Ways of Putting Pressure, unquote, violation of freedom of expression and association in Ethiopia. This report, to be released on March 24, is the first of 2 reports. The other report to be released in mid-2010, as noted above. Human Rights Watch plans to publish on violation of the rights to freedom of expression, association, and assembly in Ethiopia. The enclosed report touches on the issue of the Ethiopian government's leveraging of state resources for partisan political purpose. It describes the manners in which the Ethiopian government excludes opposing supporters from access to state resources and service, and the politicization of the civil service and education sector, for example, by requiring employees to attend trainings on party policy and conditioning training and promotional opportunities on ruling party membership. Human Rights Watch second report, planned for release in mid-2010, examines in greater detail this politicization of government service in Ethiopia and its human rights consequences. The main findings of the second report are summarized below, and we are requesting your feedback on these findings. Summary of key findings. Human Rights Watch in-depth research in 3 regions of the country found that the government is systematically using government service as a tool of repression. We documented numerous examples of Kabali and Warada officials excluding opposition members from food for work programs, punishing farmers with the, quote, wrong, unquote, political outlook by withholding seeds, fertilizers, and loans, and discriminating against teachers and civil servants who refuse to join the ruling party. Human Rights Watch found that, despite government denials, these patterns of discrimination appear to be well known throughout all levels of government and are at a minimum tolerated and at worst sanctioned at the highest levels. Moreover, many of the government donor representatives supporting programs affected by those problems appear to be aware of the patterns but accept human rights violations as the price of engaging in development activities in Ethiopia. Several multilateral programs administered by the World Bank contribute to the financing and reform of the government agencies and services that, according to our research, Ethiopia is using in a repressive fashion. The programs are Protection of Basic Service Program, PBS, US dollar, $33 million, of which IDA, Productive Safety Net Program, US $173 million, Public Sector Capacity Building Program, PCCAP, $397.8 million, General Education Quality Improvement Projects, US $417.3 million, of which IDA, IBRD, US $5 million. As you know, all World Bank programs are delivered within the framework of the bank's country's assistance strategy for Ethiopia. The current strategy covers the period 2008-2011, and its objectives are to foster economic growth, improve access to and the quality of basic services, reduce vulnerability, and foster improved governance. As you also know, PBS is delivered through a block grant from the federal to the regional governments, consisting in 2008-2009 of 36% donor funds and 64% of Ethiopian government funds. PCNP, PSCAP, and GEQIP are delivered through federal ministries and regional governments, also in involving matching funds from the Ethiopia government, and total international contribution comprise around a third of Ethiopia's government expenditure. In our view, the heavily embedded nature of the donor relationship with Ethiopian government structures means that politicization or, quote, political capture of aid program, unquote, of aid programs should be a high priority for donors. It also means that donors have significant financial leverage to require the government to meet basic standards of fairness, non-discrimination, and respect for human rights in its delivery of basic services, civil service reform, and allocation of state resources. HRW's research methodology, Human Rights Watch. Our findings are based on interviews with more than 200 individuals during 3 separate research missions in Ethiopia between June and December 2009. 2 researchers spent a total of 5 and 10 weeks each in Ethiopia. They interviewed a range of witnesses who described the leveraging of government services and jobs for political purposes, including farmers, food insecure villagers, students, teachers, civil servants, and business people. They included members of the ruling party, opposition parties, and persons unaffiliated to any political parties. Our researchers also met with Ethiopian human rights activists, Ethiopian and foreign journalists, diplomats, foreign aid officials, opposition politicians, serving and retired Ethiopian government officials, and members of the Federal House of Representatives. We interviewed residents of 53 Kabbales in 27 waradas in the regions of Amhara, Oromia, and Southern Nationalities and Peoples Region, SNNPR, as well as numerous people from Addis Ababa and several from Drei. Several other individuals were interviewed in Europe and the United States. The accountants from rural residents interviewed were echoed by government civil servants, serving in farmer and regional and national government who spoke to HRW on conditions of anonymity, as well as opposition and farmer ruling party supporters who had previously served in government. Human Rights Watch would be prepared to share more details about interlocutors and locations visited in person. However, security concerns prevent us from doing so on the public record. Ethiopia is one of the most challenging countries in the world to carry out human rights research, and the consequences for victims and witnesses of speaking out about their situation can be extremely serious. For example, in December 2009, farmers from Tigray region who had allegedly complained to the regional government about denial of participation in the PCNP program for political reasons tried to meet with international groups. The government detained and threatened the 7 farmers, and security agents also detained and threatened with deportation a journalist who subsequently attempted to interview the same group of farmers. As detailed in an attached report, the Ethiopian government has put enormous pressure on individuals known to have provided information to human rights groups or diplomatic officials, including those who contribute to the 2009 U.S. State Department Country Report on Human Rights Conditions in Ethiopia. It should be a matter of grave concern for all donor representatives working in Ethiopia that any kind of independent information gathering, and particularly human rights research, carries such risks and must be conducted in secrecy. Human Rights Watch highlights this issue because while we urge you to conduct your own monitoring and investigation of the abuses described in this letter, we underline the need to take meaningful precautions to protect the confidentiality and security of those individuals met with, particularly in Ethiopia rural areas. Overview of research findings. Human Rights Watch documented patterns of discrimination and politicization of aid that took a number of forms. Partisan distribution of agriculture inputs, partisan access to microcredit facilities, partisan access to the Productive Safety Net Program, PSNP, use of state educational facilities for political purposes, political indoctrination of school students, political operation of teachers, use of the Business Process Re-engineering Program, BPR, as a means of purging individuals who failed to support the ruling party. State and party functions are focused in Ethiopia. As described in the attached report, the government uses the structure of Woreda and Kabale officials and a new tier of sub-Kabale structures to control the population at the level of the household. The Kabale and sub-Kabale officials are, in principle and practice, responsible for supervising and approving access to seeds, fertilizer, microcredit, safety net programs, relief food, and educational opportunities, as well as providing recommendation letters for all citizens in the Kabale seeking jobs, business permits, housing, land, and issuing ID cards. As such, state party officials have significant influence over the livelihoods of citizens. Human Rights Watch found evidence of Kabale and sub-Kabale officials systematically abusing their power and authority for political purposes. Partisan distribution of agriculture inputs. In all of the areas Human Rights Watch visited, we found that Kabale and Woreda officials used for implemented services supported under the PBS program seeds and fertilizers in a discriminatory manner. The local government's exclusion from these services of farmers who were not members of the ruling party or were known to have supported the opposition in 2005 was described with consistent regularity and in striking similar terms in 15 Woredas, 7 in Amhara, 7 in SNNPR, and 1 in Oromia. Kabale and Woreda officials, Kabale chairman development agents repeatedly told farmers interviewed by HRW that they did not receive inputs because of their political affiliation. Their complaints to local officials were ignored. In our view, discrimination in service delivery not only undermines development outcomes but also violates the terms of Ethiopian commitment to its citizens and to the donors who are supporting its people. A key objective of PBS 2 is, quote, improving equity and equality, inclusion in core basic social services, unquote. For Ethiopia's vulnerable rural population, politicization of those same services runs directly counter to this goal. Partisan access to microcredit facilities. Informants reported the ruling party's use of access to microcredit as a tool of social control and repression in 8 Woredas, 5 in SNNPR, 1 in Oromia, and 1 in Amhara. 2 microcredit organizations that were mentioned repeatedly in connection with partisan allocation of loans were Deddebit, affiliated to the ruling party, and OMO microfinance. Farmers and youth reported to Human Rights Watch attempts to apply for loans being refused on the grounds that they were not members of the ruling party. Many different programs exist for delivering microcredit products in Ethiopia, including the Household Asset Building Program, HABP, under the purview of the PSNP program that delivers credits through multi-purpose cooperatives as well as the government administrative system and microfinance institutions, We would urge donors to ensure that any credit facilities supported by international funds are not subject to government manipulation and pressure, and that access to microcredit facilities is equitable. Partisan access to the Productive Safety Net Program, PSNP. Human Rights Watch received accounts of discrimination in access to PSNP activists in 16 waradas, 5 in Amhara, 10 in SNNPR, and 1 in Oromia. Kabale Chairman, Appeals Committee's Chairman, and Warada officials denied access to people seeking to participate in the Safety Net Program in all areas listed in similar terms. Those in charge of the lists told people outright that they had not been accepted because of their political views, or their names were included only to be struck off at a later date when the Warada office returned the lists. People spoke of 2 lists, official and unofficial, used in distribution. In Waradas in both SNNPR and Amhara, aggrieved residents told HRW that they filed case in Warada courts for discrimination in PSNP access. Members of the ruling party in 2 different waradas in SNNPR told Human Rights Watch that they paid their EPRDF party dues solely to be included on the beneficiary lists for relief food, and that payments receipts were required to be included on the list. Interviews also reported that either they did not appeal their exclusion from PSNP because, everybody knows, that opposition supporters cannot get it, or in cases where they did report exclusion, the person designated for handling appeals was a member of the ruling party or apologized and said they were powerless to help. PSNP is targeted at the most vulnerable, chronically food insecure households. Donors acknowledged to Human Rights Watch that problems have arisen in targeting, but claim that overall their program monitoring shows that the safety net is reaching those who need it. At the same time, however, some donors told HRW that exclusion on political grounds is not a criteria for monitoring, without a reliable way of assessing the initial reasons for exclusion or the delivery of relief food distributed under PSNP. There is no way of knowing if the claims that PSNP is used as a political tool are true. On the evidence gathered by Human Rights Watch, those claims appear to have some basis. Human Rights Watch welcomes the opening of an investigation by donors into these allegations, argues donors to ensure the investigation is credible and to make the necessary adjustment to their monitoring to take into account these risks. Use of state educational facilities for political purposes. In every region, Human Rights Watch visited in Addis Ababa, interviews mentioned mass training of civil servants, teachers, and students during 2008-2009 on the ruling party's ideology of revolutionary democracy, These trainings are commonly described as sensitization, on government policies and strategy, but are in fact overt propaganda meeting of the ruling party where attendees are pressured to join the ruling party. Teachers and civil servants describe being forced to attend party political trainings and threatened with unspecified consequences if they did not join the ruling party. They told HRW that speakers at the meetings were, government officials, security people, HRW found that in teacher training college and civil services college, political training of other government and party cadres is taking place on a large scale. Since school budgets are supported under the PBS program, and school improvement and teacher training is one of the components of the GEQIP education project, donors should be concerned that partisan political activities are taking place during school time and on school premises. Moreover, several regional government officials in different regions told HRW that PSCAP funds were the main source of financing for these mass propaganda trainings. PSCAP did finance, quote, bulk training of local officials, electorates, public servants, and other stakeholders, unquote. Although the PCCAP program closed in July 2009, implementation continues through 2009. Donors should be concerned at the potential use of such trainings for partisan political purposes. Building the capacity of the government and building the capacity of the ruling party by forcing civil servants to join is not the same thing. Donors should ensure that any renewals of the PCCAP program prevent its use as a tool to limit freedom of association and belief. Political indoctrination of high school students. Teachers and students in all areas described to HRW week-long compulsory sessions during school time in 2009 for party political training of high school students. All students above grade 10 were required to attend training at their schools on a revolutionary democracy and EPRDF policy on economic development, land, and education. They were paid a per diem of 25 per to attend the 5-day training. At the end of the week, the children were asked to join the ruling EPRDF party. Some students interviewed by HRW were under the impression that they needed the party membership cards to gain admissions to university. Legally, they don't, but in practice, it is clear they do. Teachers told HRW that certain positions within schools are reserved for party members, such as head teachers, school accountants, and civic teachers and classes in particular, because they claim the curriculum is adapted for party political purpose and introduces the students to the EPRDF and revolutionary democracy. School budgets and teachers' salaries are covered in part by PBS funds. Teacher training and curriculum development is partly supported through the General Education Quality Improvement Program. Discriminating against teachers on the basis of their political beliefs and politicizing the curriculum restricts the rights to freedom of expression and association and in our views risks undermining the goal of the GEQIP to, quote, improve teaching and learning conditions. Political repression of teachers. Teachers in all provinces reported to HRW that teachers are forced to contribute a percentage of their salary, whether they want to or not, to the government-controlled Ethiopian Teachers Association. They also expressed concerns about their superiors and ruling party members repeatedly harassing and telling them to join the ruling party, and having training opportunities denied because they were not members. Once signed up, union and EPRDF dues were automatically deducted from their salary. Teachers in Oromia reported being forced to join the ruling party, OPDO, and told that if they did not join, they would be suspected as OLF sympathizers. Teachers who joined the Independent National Teachers Association, which the government has refused to register, and other independent-minded teachers who criticize the government or refuse to join the ruling party have had their opportunities for promotion and training stopped. Teachers requesting promotion or training opportunities and denied on political grounds were openly told by superiors that their political activities or lack of political contribution to the party was the reason for the denial. At teacher training college, teachers believe that joining the ruling party is a requirement for entry, as it is for university. Funding for schools and teacher salaries is a major part of PBS spending, while teachers training, both on the job and pre-qualification training, is supported by the General Education Quality Improvement Program. In our view, politicization of trainee teachers' through various means, and the harassment of teachers for their political views is not consistent with the goal of improving teaching and learning conditions. Donors should insist on respect for freedom of expression and association in the education sector. Use of Business Process Re-engineering Program, BPR, as a means of purging the civil service of opposition supporters. BPR is a part of PSCAP's component 1, which supports civil service reform to quote, promotes the development of an efficient, effective, transparent, accountable, ethical, and performance-oriented civil services, unquote. However, many donors, journalists, teachers, civil society activists, and serving civil servants described the BPR process as a political weapon in the hand of the ruling party, whereby program designed to remove moribund staff is also being used to selectively fire dissenters and opposition members. Human Rights Watch spoke to a number of donors involved in funding BPR, officials involved in running BPRs in their agencies or ministries, and a dozen civil servants who claimed they had been unfairly dismissed for political reasons as a result of BPR procedures, while those who lose their jobs may have a vested interest in a crying foul. The officials and donors running BPR acknowledged it was open to political manipulation. Based on our research, HRW is concerned that this program is being used for political purposes. HRW is also concerned that donor officials responsible for BPR, whom it interviewed, have received reports of politicization of the program and appear to have no strategy for monitoring the problem, despite the potential for it to be used to purge dissenting voices from the civil services. Our findings suggest that the politicization of fertilizer, the safety net program, microcredit, training and promotion of teachers and other civil servants, university entrants, and high school students restricts the ability of citizens to exercise their basic rights to freely associate, assemble, express themselves, and hold political beliefs. The consequence of this case reverberates beyond the individual hardship endured by the affected individuals. Only one farmer needs to be denied seeds, or one mother denied a safety net placement for the chilling message to reach the whole village. Dissent carries a heavy price, even where instances of individual persecution or discrimination may be few. The effect on all Ethiopians is wide and significant for the human rights situation throughout the country. Ethiopian government response. In interviews and meetings with Human Rights Watch, Ethiopian government officials denied allegations of discrimination access to resources and services, claiming that there was no policy of systematic patronage or punishment of the opposition. They noted that while they cannot vouch for every party member, telling HRW, quote, "If we get credible reports, we will investigate not to please anyone, but to ensure the credibility of our party." That's exactly what the late Prime Minister was said, unquote. Inadequate donor monitoring. Human Rights Watch interviewed many donor officials responsible for funding and monitoring the PBS, PCNP, and PSCAP. All diplomats and lead officials told HRW that they had heard rumors, or in some cases stated that they accepted that politicization of government services, education, and BPR takes place. All donors acknowledge that their existing monitoring mechanism would not detect the exclusion of individuals from distribution, loans, or the safety net for political reasons, not least because existing monitoring of all multilateral programs is done in conjunction with the government. Quote, "Politicization is not a criteria for monitoring," unquote, one donor official told HRW. Following donor suspension of direct budget support following the election violence and government crackdown in 2005, the original rationale for the protection of basic service program providing district-level sector-specific budget support instead of federal-level direct budget support was in large part a result of concerns that Quote, in the uncertain environment following a contested general election in Ethiopia in 2005, development partners suspended direct budget support based on an assessment that it could be vulnerable to political capture or diversion from the core priority of basic services delivery. Unquote. The PBS program documents propose several ways of mitigating that risk. One was a fairness test, quote unquote, to analyze distribution by woreda to monitor or political bias. The other was, quote, social accountability, unquote, using NGOs to monitor service delivery under Component 4 of the PBS-1 program. Component 4 is still in the pilot stage in the woreda fairness test analysis distribution by woreda, not within each Kabyle, sale, or household. Human Rights Watch research suggests that donor concerns of politicization were correct, but that the mechanism for monitoring it in the PBS program is inadequate. As a result of the evolution of party mechanisms of control to the level of household sales, the government can implement discrimination in a highly sophisticated manner by household, Kabyle, or woreda, not necessarily only at the woreda level. Quote, the fairness tests, unquote, will not capture such discrimination. As you are aware, the risk that any assistance delivered through the fused state party apparatus serves a political as well as a development agenda, or that the government's intention to curb freedom of expression and association could supersede the legal of serving the whole population equitably, is ever present in Ethiopia. It's apparent that existing methods of delivering and monitoring assistance don't sufficiently account for this high risk. In December 2009, following public reports of allegations of discriminatory access to aid-funded services, donors launched an investigation into quote-unquote distortion of aid programs in two phases. The first phase to be completed by March 2010. This exercise is welcomed, however, serious questions remain about its mandate and effectiveness given that investigations are being conducted in conjunction with the government authorities suspected of altering the problem. Request for feedback. In particular, Human Rights Watch would be grateful for your feedback on the following questions. How do you ensure your funds are not used for patronage or in a discriminatory fashion, particularly given that these multilateral programs are by design implemented and monitored in partnership with the Ethiopian government? Might you consider united insistence by donors on independent monitoring of donor-funded programs? Do you envisage making any changes to your program's monitoring system in light of acknowledgments by donor officials that existing monitoring mechanisms don't adequately capture politicization of PBS, PSNP, PSCAP, and potentially in other donor programs? Given that aid delivered through government structure dominated by the ruling party risks being politicized, and given that the CSO proclamation has reduced the pool of independent NGOs willing or able to work with donors, are you considering diversifying your channels of development spending in Ethiopia? Are you considering making a new united call for the CSO law to be rescinded? How do you propose to address the risk of Kabyle officials controlling beneficiary lists in the safety net program, including in relief food distributions that use the same structures? As the previous 2006-2008 interim country assistance strategy was drawn up to focus on protecting basic services and did not provide direct budget support because of the risk of quote, political capture unquote, of funds, why does the existing strategy CAS 2008-2011 envisage a return to direct budget support before 2011? What has changed in the assessment of the risks of political capture? If such a return to budget support is proposed, how will you ensure that any such changes has a positive impact on the human rights situation in the country while also helping to support basic service delivery? We welcome your responses and any other comments you may wish to bring to our attention regarding our findings, ideally within the next 4 weeks by April 2010 and in advance of our report to be published in mid-2010. Human Rights Watch may publish your responses unless you specifically request that it be kept confidential. As mentioned above, we reiterate that we would be pleased to discuss our findings in more detail in person. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Sincerely, Georgette Gaglan, African Director, Human Rights Watch. Copy, Embassy of France. Embassy of France to Ethiopia, Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Ethiopia, Royal Danish Embassy to Ethiopia, Embassy of Norway, Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany to Ethiopia, Embassy of Canada to Ethiopia, Embassy of the United Kingdom to Ethiopia, Embassy of Italy to Ethiopia, Embassy of Ireland to Ethiopia, Embassy of Sweden to Ethiopia, Embassy of Finland to Ethiopia, Embassy of Spain to Ethiopia, Delegation of the European Commission to Ethiopia, Embassy of the United States in Ethiopia, Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dutch Gesellschaft for GTV, Netherlands Development Organization, European Commission, Spanish Agency for International Development, Swedish International Development Corporation Agency, IDA, Canadian International Development Agency, Norwegian Agency for Development Corporation, Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Irish Aid, U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, United Kingdom Department for International Development, DFID, Agents of Francis D. Development, Mr. Obiagli Ketrian Ilgaoskili, Vice President for Africa Region, World Bank, Executive Director, World Bank, Annex Development Assistance Group to Human Rights Watch, April 2010. አድማጮቻችን ይህንን ሶርስ እንግዲህ የምታገኙት ከዲቨሎፕመንት ፍሪደም ዊዛውት ዲቨሎፕመንት ከሚለው እንትን ነው። Now we go I take a little break and ትንሽ ስለ human rights issues እናገራለን ደግሞ ማለት ነው። ማንኛውም it was a long document ሶርሱን ያው ታገኙታላችሁ ከየትኛው ምንጭ እንዳገኘ ነው። a little bit break እንውሰድ ማለት ነው። Wow, it was a big document. So, where we should go? Okay, አድማጮቻችን ዝግጅታችን ይቀጥላል። ያው